This is the first of 3 videos in which I do some housekeeping on this channel and on my blog by taking 3 books from my currently reading list and moving them to my not currently reading list, my abandoned books list, or in the parlance of BookTube, DNF, did not finish. So, if you're not interested in the housekeeping details of my reading list, feel free to skip this one and the next couple that are coming. But I'm going to be cleaning up my reading list here. So, it may not be obvious from my channel, but if you go over to my blog, I keep on the side tab here a list of the books I am currently reading. Now, currently reading can sometimes be a loose term here. These are books I've started and have the intention of finishing, but sometimes I can get distracted and I can go a long time without reading them. So the first book here, I started back in March of 2019, and this is the book I'm going to talk about today. And I think I stopped reading it sometime in 2019, I don't know, 2 or 3 months later or something like that. And all this time I have had every intention of getting back to it someday. But I think it's time for me to admit that this is going on my abandoned list. Now, for this book and for the other 2 books as well, which I'll talk about in subsequent videos, I may actually come back to these someday. But for all 3 of these, if I do come back to them someday, I'll just make a completely fresh start on them. And I'll do a new video about how I'm starting them again, and I'll just go back to page 1. Or I may not come back to them someday. We'll see. Time is limited, and there are so many books to read. So we'll hold these other 2 books off for future videos, and I am really hoping to do 3 videos in 3 days, but that's always dangerous for me to say because I've got kids. So, but yeah, that's the plan, is to come back to these on the next subsequent days. And if they're not in the next 2 days, then in the near future at least. But today I'm going to talk about the Cambridge Encyclopedia of English Usage by David Crystal. Now, David Crystal, I believe, is more famous in Britain than he is in America. I first heard about him from a Scottish friend who was telling me how interesting David Crystal was to read. I believe he has in Britain the role of the popularizer of linguistics. So kind of like in the United States, the role that Steven Pinker or John McWhorter or I don't know who else would have. But let me know what your experience is. I mean, where are you from? And how popular is David Crystal where you are from? I always worry when I make these generalizations that I'm just over generalizing for my own narrow experience. I'm American. I never heard of him before I started mixing with British people, but maybe that's just me. Are you other Americans out there, have you heard of him? Anyways, I believe he's much more popular in Britain as a popular linguist. And this is an impressive book. If you go through here, I don't know if this is going to be apparent from just this video. Maybe you have to actually flip through this. But he writes about just about every subject you can imagine. I mean, maybe it'll be more apparent here. He's got the history of English, English vocabulary, English grammar, spoken and written English, using English, learning about English, and just all these facts and pictures on every page. So this is the type of thing that I would think would have been written by a committee. Like Cambridge decides they're going to publish an encyclopedia of the English language. Of course, no one man has encyclopedic knowledge, so they farm it out to a bunch of experts. But no, this appears to be just a one-man show. I mean, the amount of stuff this guy knows is just astounding. Although who knows how much of this he has an active memory, huh? Some of this he may have had to look up while he was writing the book. I don't know. But anyways, this book was in my school library at my previous school, the place I used to work at. And because of budgetary reasons, that library space got lost. And all the books in the library had to go. So this was one of the books that was slated to go. And I picked it up. I should maybe back up and say something I should have said at the start of this video. Sorry. My day job is I teach English as a second language. I've been doing that for a number of years in different countries. I'm currently in Vietnam. And so as part of that, I try and do some professional development reading. And all three of these books are related to professional development reading for teaching English as a second language. Now, this is not about teaching English, but it's just about general linguistics, which I view as part of my professional development to acquire some background knowledge on. So I had this book for, I don't know, a couple years in my apartment. And then the COVID lockdown happened. And I got into some bad habits at that time. Actually, maybe, I think I started this in 2019, right? So maybe even a little bit before the COVID lockdown started. But I was working evenings at the time, and I was getting into some bad habits where I would wake up, and I don't know how many of you can identify with this. I would wake up, and my brain would just not be fully functioning until 2 hours after I woke up. I needed a couple cups of coffee and just a couple hours to get my brain up and running. So during that time, I wasn't really feeling like I was up to doing any heavy-duty intellectual tasks, and I would mainly just surf the web, where I drank my coffee for the first couple hours of a lazy morning. And that is, well, first of all, it's a waste of time. Second of all, it's probably not good for your attention span, right? The internet is destroying your attention span. And then thirdly, I was just worried that too much screen time was not good for my eyes. I'm already terribly nearsighted. Probably a lot of us on BookTube are, huh? But I was worried about the blue light from the computers and all that stuff. And I don't know how much of that is legitimate worry and how much of it that is not. I'm not an expert. But anyways, I thought to myself, what if I was to just do some light reading in the morning? And nothing too heavy, just some light reading on professional development. And this book, because it looks like a magazine with its layout here, looks like it would be the kind of easy thing to absorb in the morning, and then you learn a little bit about linguistics, and it's colorful, and it's got pictures and graphs. By the way, the layout, I don't know if you can tell this, but the layout of this is usually the 2-page spread. So there's one topic, which will cover a couple pages. So it's the goal was to read 2 pages every day and just cover one 2-page spread and learn a lot about linguistics while I was doing it. Now, very early on, I discovered that perhaps this book was actually not the best book for the purposes I had intended it for, because I had intended it for some light reading early in the morning when I was still waking up. And despite the very colorful and appealing layout here, it's not always light reading. So you can see the section here on Old English and the Old English corpus, and there's a section somewhere here on Old English grammar. Where is that? Oh, yeah, some features of the grammar of Old English. So, maybe not the ideal for the first thing you read in the morning, but I soldiered through, especially during the COVID lockdown. I guess I had some extra time in the mornings. And I made it, actually. I've got my bookmark over here. I made it all the way up to the section on taboo. I remember specifically I left off on taboos, which is 172 pages. So that's not bad. I don't remember why I stopped reading it. I mean, like all the books I stopped reading, I didn't really make a conscious decision to stop reading it. I think I just missed one day, and then I missed 2 days, and then I missed 3 days. I think perhaps after there was a period where the COVID lockdown let up in Vietnam, and I went back to regular work, and then this book wasn't so convenient to carry around with me. You can see it's a bit of a bulky book. But I did actually read... How many pages is this book? Including the indexes, it's close to 500. So I read a fair chunk of this book by making it to page 172. Now, the problem I have with a lot of the books I read for professional development is, yes, I read this, but how much of this do I remember? Very, very little. You know, I had this idea that I was going to read this book. I was going to become really educated in linguistics. I was going to take all the information that was in this book and transfer it from this book into my brain. But, I read it. I read it carefully. I didn't just skim over it. I forced myself to pay attention. The difficult parts on the structures of Old English grammar, I actually did force myself to carefully digest it. But I don't remember it. That's an ongoing struggle with books I've read about professional development. It's part of the reason why I've become more disillusioned with professional development reading as I get older. I think part of that is just the nature of reading about grammar and linguistics is it just tends to be a bunch of factoids. Whereas when I read a literature book, I remember the narrative. I mean, I certainly don't remember every detail 5 years later, but I remember the general story of most of what I read. I'm also a history nerd, and when I read a history book, I generally remember the narrative 5 or 10 years later. Again, not every detail, but because there's a general narrative framework that your brain can latch onto. When I get around to talking about the grammar book here, it's going to be the same thing. I read that book a couple times through, and unfortunately I started this book a couple times. I read the first half of this book a couple times through. But yeah, unfortunately with that book as well, I all that work trying to read it and study, and I just don't remember it. I don't know. Maybe I'm going about this all wrong. Maybe casual reading is the wrong way to move something into long-term memory. Maybe I need to put these into Quizlets or put them on flashcards or something like that. Perhaps people who are more inclined to linguistics, who have more of a linguistics type brain, would remember this more. I was a history and literature study in college, and then I just fell into linguistics because I got into teaching English abroad, as a lot of people do. So I'm not sure my brain is naturally predisposed to absorb this stuff. But yeah, you'll excuse me as I just lament on camera about all the time I spent studying this book and how little of it I remember now, which is true of a lot of my professional development reading, alas. I do remember it being fairly pleasant to read through at the time, and you can see all these pictures and graphics here make this book very visually appealing. I was complaining about the sections on Old English grammar and stuff like that earlier. And those are sections where you do have to force yourself to pay attention. But David Crystal is, I think he's got his reputation as a popular linguist for a reason. He does write in a way that's readable and easy to understand and interesting, relatively interesting. Um, now, this book is maybe not a great book to show on camera because it's falling apart a little bit. It was actually in much better condition when I first picked it up from my school library, but I don't know if you can see, we've got tape covering over some of these pages. We had a 2-year-old in the house. She's older now, and she developed a fascination with books, and she loved looking through them, and she loved looking at this book. And I tried to stop her when I was home. My wife was not as strict about it. But you know how kids are with books. They don't know how to handle them. So she would pick this book up from the floor, and she would pick it up like this, right? Not like this, but like this, and just tore this piece off here. So it is falling apart a little bit. I have noticed at the new school I'm working at, though, they actually have multiple copies of this in their school library. So if I want a better copy of it, I can pick it up from my school library, and maybe I'll just read it at school rather than attempting to take it home. Or I was even thinking a few months ago when I was toying with the idea of restarting this book, keep this book at home. My daughter's older now, so she's better with books anyways. Keep the other copy at school, and try and reread through some of these. Try and read this book again. You can see, the positive of this book is it's so colorful and big. But the negative of this book, if you're trying to read through it as a reading project, is it's a little bit difficult to transport. And certainly, for me nowadays, when my reading time is limited, I get a lot of my readings done on lunch break. This isn't something you'd want to hold in line with you at the cafeteria or sit down and hold with one hand while you're reading a sandwich. And that's one of the other reasons I think I stopped reading this book, is because it was inconvenient to carry around. But like I said, there's part of my brain, part of me, is still toying with the idea of doing this again someday, restarting it from the beginning because I've forgotten everything. Maybe reading some of the copies at my school and supplementing that with a copy I keep at home, for one copy at work and one copy at home. Or not. It's probably one of those things I talk about, but I'm never going to do. But certainly for now, I think it's long overdue that I move this book to my DNF list, my abandoned book list. So this one is off my currently reading list, and stay tuned for these two next, hopefully filmed within the next couple days.